Okay. All right. So I'm just going to let some people file in here. Welcome. Welcome to another lesson here at the US Chess School. You guys all know me, but I'll just introduce myself for maybe those that haven't been a part of one of these before. My name is Kassa Korley. I'm an international master. And today what I wanted to discuss was the theme of the lesson was basically going to be holding on to the rope. So what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of times we get into situations, and this is actually very personal to me. You get into situations where you're in a time crunch and you have to make difficult decisions, or at least challenging decisions under duress. And I've noticed personally, coming out of, the pandemic's still going on, but playing chess again out of the pandemic, that's something I've actually struggled with. The openings are kind of there, but the decision-making when pressed has not been ideal. And I think that all of us can learn something about this by looking at Hikaru Nakamura's games, because you basically see time and time again, someone that doesn't really get much out of the opening even, or he's much worse even sometimes. And he makes the right practical decision over and over and over again. And if we're able to kind of build on that skill, you all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what positions you get, you just read and react at a high level. And so it seemed like a really good time to do that to do this lesson, because he recently won the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz, the event that ended 2 days ago with, and after 27 games of chess as Rapid and Blitz, he didn't lose a single game, which is incredible. Now, I don't really care so much about the Blitz games, but there were several moments in Rapid games where it's like, wow, he got out of this, he got out of that. He reacted from a challenging position here and at a high level. And that's what I want to focus on. So I have 5 examples that we're hopefully going to get through in the hour, which are basically snapshots. So I took the positions basically from the middle game, or maybe even sometimes the end game, and they're basically snapshots where we're going to try and read and react. I also wouldn't be remiss if I didn't mention that he also got 11 out of 11, or was it? I think it was 11 out of 11 today in the Title Tuesday for some of you that do play that. So he's on a roll. But again, what I want you to think about is holding on to the rope, or not letting go of the rope, keeping the position stable, keep making good moves even when under duress, because all of these are actually rapid games. Okay, so this is the first position in front of you that you should be able to see. It's a game between Nakamura with white and Svidler with black. Peter Svidler, who's also playing in the Sinkfield Cup that started today. Fortunately, he's not doing so well in this first round game, but that's neither here nor there. White's position out of the opening is kind of ordinary. In fact, I don't really think white has an advantage at all. If you were to check with engines later, that would basically be confirmed. And normally when black equalizes quickly, sometimes a white player starts to push the envelope or starts to err. But I really like the sequence of moves over the next few. And I wanted to throw it to you and get a perspective of what type of concrete planner idea would be your approach in this position. So take a moment, maybe 30 seconds, look at the position, and maybe try to figure out what would be your next 2 or 3 moves here with white. Variations are very much welcome. Okay, so I do have some idea in the chat, some ideas in the chat. So I'm going to throw it to Ryo. Ryo, if you want to try and say what you messaged me. Trying to unmute you.
Yeah.
There you go.
I don't think the knight on c3 is that great, so I wanted to play a3 with the plan of knight a2, knight b4. This is also beneficial, as I might be able just to play bishop c3, knight d2, and then he can't really open up the queen side.
Okay, so you're basically saying A3 knight A2. So let's say A3, maybe black goes rook FC8, and you're going to continue with knight A2 anyway?
Yeah.
So as soon as your knight goes to A2, I'm worried about knight E4. Are you're not worried about that? Are you comfortable giving me the dark square bishop? Because as soon as you cede that central square, I intend to take it. But also bishop E4 is an option as well. But I would try knight E4, try to get your
knight
bishop.
E4, knight B4.
Knight E4, knight B4.
Yep.
And then knight takes, bishop takes, and you feel like you've gotten somewhere there. That's fair. That's very fair. So let's just take a look at that. So A3, I just said rook FC8, just trying to improve on the C file, knight A2. And I initially was looking at knight E4, knight B4, and you're saying, well, I'm going to get my bishop to B4, and I'm going to feel very good about myself. That's not altogether a bad plan. I still feel a little reluctant though to give up this E4 square. But I can't immediately say, well, that was a bad idea or that was a good idea. I can't, maybe I don't actually take on B4. But I can't because you have it. The D5 pawn is hit. So maybe I have to take and bishop takes B4. Maybe you're halfway home. Yeah, maybe this bishop on B4 is doing something now. What if I go bishop E4 instead of knight E4?
Here, if I go knight B4, knight takes B4, bishop takes B4, what's the idea?
Well, for starters, I might not have to. I might not actually wind up taking on B4 now. So queen B6 maybe is a bit more compelling, just because I can afford to keep the tension here.
Okay, so then I'm not going to play knight B4. I'm going to play bishop C3.
Bishop C3.
No, not knight B4 at all.
Sorry,
I don't want knight B4. I want to play bishop C3 Miguel. Oh,
gotcha. So after bishop B4, bishop C3, and is your idea knight D2?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I actually don't mind this plan. I do think that, my instinct tells me that when you, again, leave this E4 square, or you intend to leave this E4 square, you're giving up something. That maybe is something that could be checked later, because of course we're not going to be running engines now. But you do have a fair point, and you did create some ideas that were constructive. So cheers to that. So let's take a look at what Nakamura played. So Nakamura played bishop F1. I think it's a really decent move, because you're basically asking the question to the queen, what are you going to do? Of course, the pawn being on A4 is a little bit overextended. It can be a strength or it can be a weakness, but by playing bishop F1, you basically keep the queen on the A file, and you ask that question. Black went queen A7, and then white went H3. I think this is a really, really good. Now, again, white has no real advantage here. I really want to point that out. But the idea of chasing this bishop or challenging this bishop is really critical. If this bishop remains on the long diagonal like that, black is absolutely fine. If you just look in terms of a chess principles from a chess principles perspective, black's rooks are already connected. A4 does take some space. You had to be kind of concrete about that bishop on F5, and it just by asking some small questions, you kind of make blacks have to make some decisions, because now G4 might come into play. If the bishop doesn't stay on that diagonal, that's going to be kind of an issue. The bishop might have to go back to D7. You could always go like E6 and allow G4, but, giving up the bishop pair wouldn't be such a stellar idea. In fact, just to ask you guys, if let's say E6 was played, it wasn't, but let's say E6 was played, white went G4 and bishop E4, what's the proper way to corral this E4 bishop? Anyone? Because sometimes you see this type of thing where they put the bishop on E4 and they try to they try to extract some initiative for it. What is the right way? Oh, no, Mike. Oh, okay. All right, Sarvagna.
I initially was thinking about like knight E5, And then knight takes e5, knight, d takes, and then f3.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's a very interesting idea. So knight e5. If knight takes e5, the idea is takes, knight moves, and then maybe f3 traps the bishop. Yeah, that's very, very compelling. It's funny. I wasn't, concretely, you guys are actually one step ahead of me with these tactical concepts to try and get the bishop. It may very well work, actually. So knight e5, I do have as an option now g5 potentially, although I wasn't thrilled about making this decision. So f3 definitely did bother me a little bit. But typically what I was kind of looking for was and now it's a little bit unfair because I'm basically saying assume that the bishop isn't getting trapped, and it is. I think your answer is right, but a lot of times we have situations where when bishop e4 happens, you actually move the knight and you go something like knight g5 to secure the bishop. Now here, knight h2 and knight e5 are probably more compelling moves, but what I wanted to get at was that taking the bishop with the c3 knight would be probably a mistake. And the reason for that is the position gets extremely dynamic after d takes e4. And you see this in, certain positions, even in like the bishop f5 slow Slavs, like the e3 slow Slavs, where the bishop comes to e4 and it's not correct to take with the knight on c3, because even though these pawns are doubled, black gets tremendous counterplay, and the weakness of the f3 square and the backward f pawn can be a concern. So kudos for finding knight e5, knight h2. The real point I want to get at is if you were to take the bishop with a piece, you'd want to do it with knight g5 takes e4, and then you maintain your knight on c3, and you maintain control of the center without having your knight on g5 woefully misplaced. So, but yeah, you guys were right on the money tactically. So, okay, moving on. So h3 actually caused a very annoying question. Black has to make a decision. Svidler went for h5. And this is, again, a totally reasonable move. But now you've kind of extracted something, at least, where the g5 square is a little bit sensitive. Black has pushed a little bit to try and justify the bishop being there. And then again, Nakamura makes these very annoying tickling moves. So he goes knight h4, asking the bishop where it really wants to go. The bishop went to d7. There was a repetition. And then a3. So again, not beating yourself, just basically asking small little questions about how black is going to handle the position. And in the next few moves, Svidler actually just made a mistake. So there was rook d8, bishop g2 back, just kind of teasing out what black's play is going to look like. Queen a6, bishop f1, a repetition again, and then rook c1. So ultimately, in the last few moves, white's been a little bit more constructive than black has. So, I mean, rook d8, we don't, it protects d5, and I think maybe Svidler was trying to get in knight e4, but really you'd like to contest on the c file. And now all of a sudden, a few moves ago, just the a4 pawn was a concern. Now the d5 pawn, might be a little bit of a concern. Again, forcing this h5 move is a little bit annoying. And Nakamura kind of showing who's boss is saying, I have knight h4, knight f3 whenever I want, which is also might be a little bit annoying for you. And in a few moves, the situation changed. So knight e4 wound up being played, and then knight h4 is played. And this is, I think, what happens when you kind of hold the rope is basically your opponent tries to find something really concrete. And surprisingly, I must acknowledge that Ryo, again, earlier was not necessarily minding the bishop on d2 being captured, it seemed. Here, that's actually a correct decision to not mind it, because after knight h4, knight takes d2, queen takes d2, bishop c8, and f4, white has transformed the position in a much, much better way than black has. Even though black has the two bishops, which, I typically laud, this bishop is basically locked behind a stone wall and is not going to wake up anytime soon. And because black has played h5, essentially g6 is going to be constant issue. So black can't prepare a break with f6 and e5 one day. And so the bishops are nullified. The rooks aren't connected anymore. And Nakamura went on to win a pretty smooth game. And I think it just goes to show when you make some of these very small, subtle moves, good things can happen because your opponent kind of loses the thread. I want to get to the next example, but I'll just show you how the position transformed so you have an idea of why it, ended. But basically, white's already much, much better here, surprisingly. So just to show you a few moves, essentially, white just transferred pieces to the king side, executed this g4 break, and black really didn't have any counterplay. You see how the bishop on g7 is kind of dead. The a4 pawn being there makes it difficult for black to break through with b4 at a later point. And very simply just doubling, invading, and then the game was pretty much over. So it was actually kind of funny. Svidler resigned in this position when it was Nakamura's turn, but queen takes g7 is not rocket science. So it's amazing how things can kind of transform very quickly. Nakamura is obviously on the better. It was obviously not in any serious trouble in this game, but let's go to the next example. Okay. So this is a position. Oh, and actually Nakamura was black here. So this is a position against Le Quang Lam, very strong grandmaster in his own right. Well, everyone this event was, and black is clearly worse. White has a bishop for a knight. That should matter. They're pawns on opposite sides of the board. So typically you prefer the bishop in such cases. You prefer the bishop in most cases. Black's king is definitely worse than white's king. Queen's off the board, the king being centralized actually not as a pretty decent thing. And black's not even finished with development. So it truly does look really, really bad. And, getting out of stuff like this is hard. It's not easy. So what would be your plan of attack here with black to try and get something going? I think everyone here probably will correctly get the next move black plays. But what are the next few moves? Like, what might you hope to achieve in the structure? Because basically your goal here is not to lose. It's to not lose. It's not to win right now. It's to not lose. And I think Nakamura does this very, very well. And so what would be your plan here? I'll give you about 20, 30 seconds. And someone in this chat is saying, oof, black's pieces are horrible. Yes, they are. They're not great. All right. So I have one idea. I have another idea. Why don't we start with Eric?
So I actually played rook d4 because I felt like white's rook was very active. So he has ideas of rook g3 followed by bishop f6. And he has ideas of rook d8.
So when rook d4, you're trying to get rid of the rook, and you think you're going to have enough time to get your king out? Or sorry, you're going to have enough time to get your queenside pieces out? Like, what do you think white's move is going to be after rook d4?
Maybe he could go king e3 or something.
Okay, so king e3, and then you're going to take on d3 and go knight c6, that type of thing?
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, so rook d4 is an option. Rook d4 is definitely an option. Let me throw it to one more person, and then we'll look and see what happened. Angela, hopefully your mic works, so you can go ahead and tell me what. Does your mic work?
So,
there you go.
I was thinking of rook takes d4, after e takes d4, the pawn on d4 looks a little bit weak. So maybe king d3 to target it. And if they play c5, then b4.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that I had a similar thought that like basically transforming the structure with rook takes d4, e takes d4, makes it actually even harder to hold, because when you have the bishop versus the knight and pawns on both sides, I'm going to trust the passers with the bishop more than I'm going to trust the passers with the knight. And then with the king, as Angela's pointing out, so close to the queenside pawns, I feel like black's probably going to have some trouble holding on to them. So yeah, so rook takes d4, e takes d4. I'm not sure whether I would go king d3 right away or not, because c5 is going to have to be played. I might actually start with rook e1, just because I would like to get the open file. So something with like rook e1, I don't know, let's say c5 or knight c6. I would like to go bishop f6. So let's say, like, just for argument's sake, like, let's say like knight c6, bishop f6. I think this type of position is extremely, extremely dangerous, just because, black's rook on a8 is not going to be active. White actually might also create some type of back rank problems for the black king. And I don't believe this is holdable. So it actually goes back a little bit to an observation that Arnav actually messaged me, which was that is trading black's only active piece good? So, I mean, there's like this balancing act between, dealing with potentially nullifying white's activity and also trading and also trying to get your pieces out. And yeah, I actually don't think it's great to trade black's only active pieces this juncture, because it's the only thing preventing the white rook from getting to the E file and really making the most of the position. And so it's a tough position to judge, but you can see how if you make a certain decision, you can be losing very quickly. And so I think the decision-making here is really spot on from Naka. And he started with the move knight c6. It's a good move. You get a tempo on the bishop, but it's a tough move to make because white gets in bishop f6 and you think, oh my gosh, now the rook can swing over. I have back rank problems, et cetera, et cetera. No, now rook f4 was played. Again, I think very, very difficult move to make, basically challenging the bishop. I'm basically saying that after bishop g5, rook g4, well, okay, this didn't happen. This actually wound up happening, but basically saying that if rook g3 check, there's no real mate here. The king can go probably to h7, I would say, as strange as that looks, just because rook g7 is not that useful. Rook g7, king h6, the bishop is under attack. And if rook f7, there's king g6. And so you keep the king, reasonably safe, and you challenge the bishop right away. Of course, if king f8, if king f8, sometimes, rook h3 will be a concern. But very good move. So rook f4, bishop g5, rook g4, rook g3 is played. And here, I think, again, is a very, very tricky decision. Do you trade the rooks or not? Do you play rook takes g3? Do you breathe a sigh of relief and say, whew, the attack is gone, or do you do something else? Sarvagna, you can go ahead and take the floor.
So I was just saying that I don't think black should take because of f takes g3, and then after bishop f6, the pawn on e5 is like really weak, or like rook f6, and then like king e3, king e4, and you can take the e5 pawn. Like I just didn't like that idea of having like a weakness on e5. So I didn't think about taking, but I'm not exactly sure if I don't take what's going to happen.
Yeah. So again, really, really tough decision, but I think you got it right, because if you do take, as you mentioned, first of all, I wasn't even completely sure how to take, but now that you mention it, f takes g3 is a great choice, because this rook on a8 is not getting to an open file. Like D8 is covered. This rook can potentially invade on F6, but also rook C1 could be an issue. And C7 is, problem is hit as well as the knight. And, surprisingly, capturing away from the center, it has real merit. And of course, let's not forget the quality of the king compared to the black king is huge. And so kind of counterintuitively, you actually move away. And rook D4 check was played very quickly. And it's like these kind of instinctual decisions when you're in a position of adversity is really, really high level, like very, very good. If we become great defenders, we won't lose. So it's really, really impressive to take these types of decisions quickly. After rook D4, white went king E2, and then king H7 was played, getting out of the discovery check. And this, again, was a decision that was kind of brave to me, because I look at the king going to H7 and I'm like, wait, you're voluntarily cutting your king off. Nakamura looked at it and said, well, if I put the king on F8, I have to deal with rook H3 issues, and my king actually doesn't really get to safety this way. So very, very impressive play. Now, at the same time with king H7, there was a check here, and then, white could potentially go back. And I think the other piece of this is that, Nakamura is playing with the drawing margin, so to speak, right? He doesn't mind a draw here. So sometimes I think we underestimate that when we calculate lines, because you play an opponent that might be a little bit lower rated than you, or you're someone you don't necessarily want to draw against. And you think, well, if I do this is going to be a drawing line and I have no play. And at the end of the day, you underestimate how frustrating it is to look at a position that seems super promising and then settle for something that is not awesome. And so a lot of times people push the envelope in situations where maybe it's not warranted. This is not exactly that type of situation, but I just want to emphasize that, just because you go for a variation that seems to be drawing doesn't mean it's going to actually turn out that way, because it's frustrating to stubbornly. It's frustrating as an attacker to see someone stubbornly defend and then settle. So sometimes you just play the best moves and you see what happens, and that's also what Nakamura is doing. So anyway, so king H7, king G7, bishop H6, king G8. Again, very brave decision. I think most people would just go king F6. I mean, they wouldn't keep their king harassed like this, but he doesn't mind. And then rook C1 was played, rook D6. And again, the position hasn't even improved drastically, but definitely this white rook, which was doing something before on the D file, has left that square and is not as nice on H3. There's no mating attack right now, and Nakamura is holding on to the rope. That's the theme. Hold on to the rope. Don't let go of the rope. Be stubborn. Ultimately, Naka was able to get a draw from this position, or after lots more defending, which will zip through relatively quickly to get to the next example. Bishop E3, rook A D8, rook H4, B5. This prevents rook C4 doubling. It's also extremely weakening. But hey, this is not a good position, and he's making tough decisions. G3, rook D7, covering the C7 pawn. Making sure that now the knight can be free to move. Rook C5, A6, covering B5 pawn. A4, trade pawns, right? Get closer to these endgames. And now knight D4, excellent decision, saying, the rook endgame is where the salvation will be. And Lei Kwang played bishop takes D4. Controversial decision. King F1 is probably be preferred. The bishop is better than the knight, even here. And you can take it now, you can take it tomorrow, you can take it the next day. There's no need to rush that decision. In any case, after some more solid defending, even here, the position truly looks risky, the 3-on-1, but he gets the rook active through a series of nice maneuvers. Rook F6 attacking the F pawn, rook B6 attacking the B pawn, and then coming behind with rook E6. And then eventually black swung the rook around and made, quite frankly, a very uncomfortable draw. Now holding at the end with a ring around the rosy. That's what I'm calling this. ring around the rosy, basically, right? The king just dances around the pawn f7, and eventually that's a repetition. I would venture to say that most people would not have drawn this game. Most of the top players in the world would not have held this position because it was truly disgusting. But, hold on to the rope, finding ways to kind of crawl out when you're in an unpleasant situation. Especially, again, let's not forget, this is a rapid game that helps the defending side a little bit because White had more time to think. They could, be more challenge White more. But also, it was tough to defend like that under pressure. And you see the practical decisions being made to not go down quickly. That's a key. Is you'll see that the longer you're more tenacious, the better off chance you'll have. Okay, moving on to the next example. This is I normally take one or two games the whole session. I'm trying to do it a little bit more rapid fire here. Okay, so let me flip the board. Okay, so Nakamura was White in this position against Dominguez. Dominguez, I must say, struggled with time in the rapid and the blitz, but also especially in the rapid. And he was actually completely losing much earlier. Now it's actually kind of a game. The material is equal. Black has the two bishops. This rook on h6, which was it was on h8 not too long ago, was terrible. Now it seems like Black is almost getting back into the game. And I thought the decision making from here was really, really excellent. So how would you approach this position with White? You obviously have more space in the center. You definitely have slightly better pieces, or maybe not slightly, significantly better rooks, more centralization. But if you give Black a few moves, they're going to consolidate. And if you let Black get rook d6 and, something along those lines, Black's going to be okay. Or how would you approach this? I'll give you, I know it's unfair, but I'll give you about 30 to 40 seconds to venture some ideas. And why don't you get and with your idea? Why don't you give if you have an idea, give maybe three or maybe a three ply variation, like your move, their move, your response type of thing. All right, I'm going to throw it to Ryo.
Okay, so my move is, I have a feeling, I assume this arrives from some Berlin or something. So
no, it actually wasn't a Berlin. This was a Queen's Gambit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think he wants to play h4 and then f6 at some point and maybe g5 and try to trade some pawns. What I want to do is play h4, now also fixing h5 pawn, also helping the knight on f4 stay there after f6 g5. You can just take it.
Gotcha.
And keeping the rook, passive.
So what if they play rook d6?
Rook d6, then rook d6 I can raid and then knight e4 maybe. I think I can win the pawn.
And bishop takes f4, you're not worried about?
Pawn takes f4.
Gotcha. All right, so let's see. So h4, rook d6, takes, and you're saying knight e4 you really like. Let's say, I was just saying, let's say if we take, you feel very good about this.
c4 takes.
Yeah, I don't know. Something like knight d4 doesn't bother you? We have knight e2. The bishop is coming out. Maybe I'm getting a little bit of a foothold now. You captured away from the center, so even in some rook end games, they might just be drawn with a doubled f pawn.
And maybe, but I still can play rook takes c5, right? Oh wait.
Rook takes e5, knight e2, bishop takes e2, knight bishop takes e4, bishop takes g2.
Keep bishop takes g2, rook g5. And I
that's a nice one. That's very nice. Okay, so a little bit further down, but yeah, so rook takes e5, knight e2, king f1. Okay, I was saying bishop takes e4 and then bishop takes g2, and you were pointing out that there's a rook g5 in the end, which is annoying to say the least. But I'm still not totally convinced. I mean, obviously the game situation was different, but I also might have knight takes f4. I feel like I've gotten some type of footing here that maybe I didn't deserve. And I just want to point out that you weren't the only one that was suggesting h4, securing the knight. But the idea I think that you anticipated black going for was f6. And I would venture to say under no circumstance is black going to play f6 because the rook is buried. I know it's funny because you mentioned the Berlin, and there's these lines in the Berlin, where the rook goes to h6, and then there's some f6, rook g6 type of transition. Sometimes even the black pawn goes to h4. But the thing that's very different about this is that the C and D files are wide open, which is not the case in these Berlin games where you see rook h6 and f6. So if black plays f6, they completely bury their bishop. They completely bury their rook. So that's why I don't think you have to be worried about f6. Like the black would desperately like to get this rook out to do something meaningful. And Arnav, he doesn't have a mic, right? But he's pointing out that in the Berlin, of course, there'd be the double C pawns that control central squares. The king might be on c8 in some situations. Although in the Berlins with rook h6, normally the king is on e8. Actually, the king is not usually on c8 in the rook h6 lines. In fact, when you see most players play the Berlin wall today, you'll find that the king is actually very rarely on c8 in the top level games because so many players voluntarily go king e8 at some point, especially when they're playing this h5 plans and they keep their king on the king side. In fact, when I was first looking at the Berlin, this is a little bit of an aside, the king going to c8 was actually the dynamic attempt because you basically would be trying to hide your king on b7 and c6 and trying to activate your rooks and playing very aggressively on the king side. They don't do that anymore. I'm not playing at these positions so much myself, but you'll find they don't really do that anymore. So it'd be interesting if someone could investigate why that is, but I think there's some concrete tactics there that basically kind of are why the king, you almost always see the king going to e8 now. Anyway, so the move that Nakamura played, and I think it's just one of these nice moves that keeps all the pressure on and doesn't allow black a moment's respite, right, is this move bishop a3. Really simple move, but also a very easy move to miss. And basically you cause immediate problems. I think most people would agree that if you win the c5 pawn and the bishops come off, you're just going to win. You have the open files. You'd be a pawn up, and it's actually very difficult to hold on to c5, right? I'll just point out that knight b4, which might be something you'd consider for a half second, would lose on the spot to this type of deal, right? Some rook c8 business like this, and it's just a wrap. Black wound up playing b4, and after bishop b2, it might be like, well, what did you get out of this? Well, all of a sudden the c5 pawn is backward and weak, and the structure on the queen side for black is really compromised. And so again, you're basically inviting black to make really difficult decisions, and nothing has changed here. You still have control of the center. Playing the rook to d6 now is less attractive than before. It's just not great. Now knight d3 comes into play, as Sir Wagner is pointing out. Knight e4 might also be an issue, and just a really, really nice practical decision. After bishop b4, bishop b2, a5 was played, trying to justify the space, having to play b4. Now black is saying, well, if I get a4, maybe this isn't so bad, but there's just no time for this. And now Naka played knight e4. you can't hold the c4 pawn anymore. So Dominguez just ignored the threat. And after gobbling up the c5 pawn, there's really nothing to this. And now you can see white still has the centralization. And after h4, there are probably plenty of moves that get the job done. But I like knight d7, right? Get rid of this bishop that is probably the strongest minor piece that black has in the position, probably. It's defending the king. It's covering some important squares in the center. And the game ended relatively quickly. Bishop e7, knight b6, fishing around for more weaknesses. Knight c8 is also a pretty nasty threat. Bishop e7 covered, but bishop b7 runs into new problems. Rook d7, that's pretty vicious, right? Now there's problems along the seventh rank. Rook d6 was played. Not a very nice move to make because after rook takes d6, bishop takes d6, white basically went with the killer blow here. Anyone want to identify the killer blow? Yeah, we have a talented group here. So I'll just cheers to everyone. It was unanimous. Everyone said the same thing. Yeah, very impressive. Knight c8. Full credit. Everyone said knight c8. My apologies. I missed you there, Aryan. But I'll get you soon. All right. So yeah, and then it's basically double attack. So it's after bishop takes c8, rook takes c6. The position is lost. Ash, as a matter of fact, why don't you finish the game off for me here? I mean, after bishop c7, Aryan, you want to just tell me why? I know this is maybe not what you're looking for, but you want to tell me why what's the next move here?
So here, knight d5.
Yeah. And basically there's a problem on the C file. Note, very important. I think this was something to note as well. It's like if the bishop wasn't covering A1, that would be mate. So it's, tactics are always kind of hanging by a thread in some circumstances. And this is no different, but of course it's not difficult to see a piece is dropping. So anyway, you look at that game and you say, oh, well, nothing out of the ordinary, but it's really impressive to make these crunch decisions when you have 10 minutes on your clock, 5 minutes on your clock. And this is consistently what was being done. So it's not easy to make these decisions. I think making practical choices under duress is something we can all get really better at. Okay, moving on. I think that was the third example. So we might actually get to all five. Okay. This next example, this was extraordinary. If you actually saw this game, I'm hoping no one here saw it. But Nakamura was getting destroyed for like a long time. And by long, I mean, there's like 15 to 20 moves of being lost. And just keeping the game going is impressive. But even to get here, this position sucks. The king is super exposed. The black has the bishop against the knight here. There isn't a lot of saving graces in this position. And Nakamura crawls out. He crawls out. And these are decisions made under duress. And so a series of good moves is going to have to be made here because this is really not a walk in the park. Let's get started on that. How would you it's white to move here. How do you even begin to defend this position? All right. So I see a few different ideas. Although one of the ideas is from someone that said they saw the game, so I can't call on you. So I'll start with someone that did not see the game. So, Eric, what are you thinking?
I was thinking queen d3. So I don't think rook d3 works because then he can trade rooks and queen e2. So
you said you don't think what works?
Rook b3.
Okay, so your first thought was rook b3, but you rejected it because rook takes, queen takes, and queen e2. Gotcha. And you're saying after queen e2, you're losing material, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe even getting mated, actually. Yeah, you're probably getting mated. So yeah, so that makes so you rejected rook b3, and then you said you went to queen d3.
Yeah.
So what do you anticipate Black's next move to be after queen d3?
Probably rook b2.
And how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to deal with queen b3, rook b2 check?
King h1.
Mm-hmm. And why queen d3? So queen d3 obviously got out of rook b2, losing the queen. But do you feel like you've strengthened your position in some way? Is it just defending the threat, or was there something more with queen d3?
I feel like queen d3 actually, well, it protects both the rook and knight at the same time. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, it does protect the rook and the knight at the same time. All right. So queen d3 wasn't played, and I think maybe we should figure out why. So queen b3, rook b2, I think that would be the move. And I don't like that the king basically has only one square, right? So king h1 is played, and it seems very dodgy. If I was Black here, I'd probably start with h5, just solving the back rank issue. And all of a sudden, I'm not so sure what your next move is going to be, actually. I'm not complete. Although maybe it's queen d8, queen h4. Maybe h5 isn't precise. Maybe I should start with h6. Basically, what I'm wondering is if I defend the back rank, do you have a follow-up? Like, let's say I go h6 instead, just so you don't have like queen d8, queen h4 ideas potentially. But even there, I take that back. Even let's say you go queen d8 and then queen h4. I'm going to argue that when you play queen takes h5 check, you actually have no checks. So here, Black could probably improve in some other very dangerous way, like queen e4. And I'm not sure how you're going to hold this one, because now rook f2 is a very serious threat, right? And it looks like something might drop. Aryan is saying, what about queen e2? So I'll give Aryan the floor just for a moment. What's your line with queen e2?
So queen e2?
Mm-hmm. And what if like queen g3, I guess, to defend?
h4?
And what if I take...
Oh, wait, no, check.
Yeah. Check, right? Yeah. I wanted to keep
or
this...
bishop d6? Bishop d6 maybe then?
Bishop d6?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that looks very dangerous. That looks very winning. I don't see how I can hold on to this rook. So that's probably good enough. Yeah, there are a few different lines, but I think the rook b2 coming with tempo was definitely a tough one to allow. The move that was played was rook c3, and it's pretty much an only move. It's critical that you defend against rook b2, but also to defend with a threat. With a threat, it attacks the bishop, and your dream scenario would be to trade some attacking units of Black's here. If you trade either of the heavies, you're thrilled because your king is so exposed. And I think, again, a very, very good move to play under duress. After rook c3, Black played queen d5 check. And here's another tricky decision. How would you handle queen d5 check? That's not a pleasant one to face. All right, so we have I'm going to throw it to Evan. I don't think I've heard from you in a minute.
I played rook f3.
And what do you think Black's next move is after rook f3?
I think he has to repeat or something.
You think he's going to repeat?
I don't think he has anything good.
So rook f3. Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit worried for you. Maybe like rook b3.
We couldn't take that with the queen.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Whoa. Not rook b3. I stand corrected. Yeah, I was looking at some idea, taking advantage of this pin, maybe even getting rook b2. And how about something like queen d4, actually? I maybe threaten queen g1 mate, also rook b2. That could be tough to deal with. And shout out to Andy, who also found queen d2, queen d4. Yeah, I think this one would be tough, right? Because I don't see how you're getting out of queen g1. If you go queen f2, rook b2 will win the game. So I think that dual threat is an issue. Yeah, but rook f3 is very natural, right? It's a very natural move to kind of block and kind of just live to fight another day. Do you have a move here?
How about no? No.
It's tough. Right? No doubt about it. Sarvagna is saying rook f2. But, at the very least, I mean, this is a winning end game, right? I mean, we're an exchange up. This king will march in and we know how to do this. So, but very, very difficult position. I'm going to throw it to Andy. Did you have a different suggestion instead of rook f3, or what were you thinking about?
No, after rook f3, I thought you could go rook a8.
Rook a8. And was there something wrong with queen d4?
No, not really.
So so rule number 1, when you find a win, you don't look for other wins. Because this is we're in training right now, I'll tolerate it. But this happens. I've done it in my own games before. I hope that you all don't build this habit. When you identify a win, do not go looking for other wins. It's literally a profound waste of time, and it hurts you. It's not constructive. Now if you're saying, oh, this win might be really difficult, and I'm not actually sure it's a win, but if you're sure it's a win, you go for it and you execute the plan that you went with. It was where your instinct took you. There was a reason you went there, and it works. Normally bad things happen when you try to look for other stuff. That's just my advice. But okay, rook a8, you're trying to go rook a2, and you're saying this is an infinitely better move than queen d4. That's what you're trying to say, Andy? Sorry, you can go for it. I think I unmuted you and then muted you by mistake.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
All right, now you're not sure. See, that's the thing. You were sure about queen d4. Now you're like, oh, I don't know. At the very least, I would be a little bit concerned about like queen d3, for instance, getting a little bit closer. Maybe queen b3. Just not worth it. Not worth it. Okay. So anyway, the move that was played was actually king h2. And I think this is such a difficult move to make under duress. I mean, you basically move your king to a diagonal where it can be checked again. And it's surprisingly difficult to deal with this. So after king h2, bishop d6 was played. What can be more natural than that? And then king g1. And you start to notice, hey, rook c8 is a real inconvenience. It just is. And there's no immediate way to add decisive fuel to the fire. The king will dance on one of these squares. And with the rook not being able to invade just yet on any of these entry squares, the fight goes on. Jeffrey played the move h5, which ultimately was not best. I mean, I think the computer is saying bishop f8, but what a move to make when you basically were saying, oh, I think I'm going to mate, and now I'm going to not play bishop f8 and not trade rooks. That's basically the idea. Instead, h5 was played. And now Nakamura actually played g takes h5, which is, again, I mean, very surprising to me. I would go rook c8 immediately. But after g takes h5, bishop e5, rook c8 check, all of a sudden white gets to this, which is like a dream within a dream, considering what we saw just a few moves ago. And honestly, if you saw the earlier part of the game or the middle part of that game, you'd be like, wait, white got to this? Like, how is this possible? But again, really, really resilient defending under duress. And I just take you to the end because, king h6, queen d2, I think is obviously excellent trading queens. And I thought it was a nice touch. Here, if king takes h5, what draws immediately on the spot for white? This one isn't very difficult at all. What move makes the position dead immediately? Sarvagna?
Knight f3.
Yeah, right. If you put the knight on f3, there's no entry squares for this king. Both pawns are on light squares. There's no way black can make progress. It could be kind of funny. Maybe they would try to bring the king back around this way. But that takes forever and, the white king would get in. So, but yeah, it's actually kind of hilarious. There's absolutely no way that black can make progress here. And can you imagine the king going king h6, king h7, king h8 and going all the way around? It wouldn't work, but it'd be funny. So yeah, that wasn't played. Instead, black played king g5. And I just thought this was a nice finesse. Nakamura played knight f3 check. After king takes f5, went h6. Really, really excellent defending. Why is h6 such a good move? Aryan, why is h6 such a good move?
So now, after he takes on h6, if you basically try to target the f pawn, if you take it, it's just dead because of the wrong colored corner. Right.
So basically, with the king being a light colored corner, we know that the bishop has to be the same color as the promotion square to knock the king off the spot. Otherwise, there's just stalemating ideas. So now, after g takes h6, all that's left to do is for the knight to sacrifice for the f pawn, and then it's just over. So this position is quite a trivial draw. The knight can literally just go back and forth. The bishop can't control all of the squares that would help the knight get back and forth to f3. And because of that, both sides know it's a draw here. Jeffrey just played f5 and, basically quickly changed it. It's just a fortress. But this is the type of impressive. I cannot say enough about how impressive this defending is. And you think about positions, I would say most people, there were two games we looked at. Out of the four games we looked at, I think two white was kind of okay, but not really killing it. And the other two games, black was clearly in trouble. And I would say probably from the two games that black was in trouble, but even let's say the other games where it's not that great for white, I'd say most people probably get like 1 out of 4, maybe 1.5 out of 4, 2 out of 4 if you're doing really great. For Naka to have gotten basically a +2 score from these games. So 3 out of 4, 3.5 out of 4 is just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous given the situations he's in. It just goes to show you there are other moments beyond. There are other moments to kind of outplay, take advantage. And I would encourage you to all level up your defense. You level up those skills because those are really going to be the difference makers in a lot of cases. I think I had one more example, but we are at time. Let me just see very quickly if I can, because it is the last one. This was the last example. We'll do this super quickly so as to not keep you long. But this was a game that was also of interest to me because it kind of looks to me like play is about to fizzle out. White has the 2 bishops. Yeah. Black is up a pawn. It's a double pawn. But, you can easily see a liquidation happening on d5 now. And then the game is just kind of equal. Like there's nothing remarkable about White's position. And it surprised me that Naka was able to keep the game going meaningfully and actually won the game. And, actually like the next 6-7 moves or something like that, he's like basically almost winning. How do you even keep the game going here meaningfully? Again, Black's threat is going to be to take on D5 and then go bishop C6 or, bishop E6. And then they're probably going to just sign the score sheets. How do you keep this going as white?
What?
Were you trying to give me a comment on this game?
Yeah, what I was actually trying to say was, if knight takes d5, rook takes d5. That's what I meant.
So you're saying
c5 just rook c7. That's what. So knight d5, my idea was rook d5. The question is what to do right now for white. That's what I was like. If it was black to move, I could do that. Okay,
but is that winning? Let's just say. Let's say it is black to move. I know it's not. And knight takes d5, rook takes c5, c takes d5, bishop takes d5, check. What if the king goes to a7?
Rook c7.
Or actually, let's say can I go? Can I? B6 is very risky. Let's say a7. Yeah. And then you say rook c, and then king b6.
b4.
Okay, so you're trying to mate me, but what if I go bishop c8?
Wait, but it's white to move. If I play b4 right now, then I'm.
Okay, so you want to start with b4 now?
Yes.
So just for context, just for people that were like, what the heck was he talking about? So I'm just going to make H. Okay, it is white to move. Let's say H3, but this is not a meaningful move, but just to get to the game where the variation we're trying out. So you're saying rook takes d5, and bishop takes d5. And I was saying, well, what about king a7? You're saying, I'm going to come in with the check, king b6, and then b4. Spectacular. And you're trying to go rook b7 mate. I have my reservations. I think I can go a5. I think I can go bishop c8. Actually, bishop c8 is kind of dodgy. Maybe a5. Oh, no, a5 is dodgy. Then no, a5 is okay. You can't go bishop e3 for a bunch of reasons, including your rook is hanging.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
I don't know. It's definitely a mess, but not what was played. Aryan?
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you thinking?
So I was saying b4 for the first move.
Okay, so you were it was kind of along the lines of what Andy was suggesting?
Raya.
What Raya was suggesting, excuse me.
Yeah.
Andy and Raya they're both in the same one row above each other one above each other in the column. That's why I was confused there. So B4, and you're basically saying I'm threatening the rook takes d5 stuff?
Yeah, like now you can't take because I also have that mate now.
So
it will be my turn.
So what if I take with the pawn? Is there a problem there?
In this case,
because I'm wondering if maybe what I have to do is take with a pawn and then go bishop c6.
Correct. Rook c7 now.
And then king b6.
Rook c8.
Rook where?
Sorry, rook dc1.
Rook dc1, and you're saying I'm fine. You're basically saying, I don't know. I'm a little bit worried for your rook. Like you're not worried about me like catching you with something like bishop c6 and saying, look at this rook on c7. It's kind of caught out. I can trade it next. I'm 2 pawns up. They're really kind of the ugliest pawns imaginable, but I am 2 pawns up. And if there's no mate, you're not going to be better. We can say that at least. But complicated. I actually applaud the creativity of B4. It's impressive. It didn't come on my radar. But anyways, just so we get out of here reasonably in a reasonable time, I'm just the move that was played by Naka was actually rook c5. And it's kind of in a way related to b4, but the key idea is that after c takes d5, bishop takes c5, now knight takes d5 can't be played. So bishop c6 was played, but knight takes d5 can't be played because if knight takes d5, rook c takes d5, this is basically an eternal pin. and there's no constructive way to deal with it. And you can't go king c8 because of rook c5, rook c7. And so all of a sudden, a position where it seemed like it's just going to fizzle out doesn't fizzle out, and you give your opponent the opportunity to make a mistake. So knight takes c5 doesn't work anymore. And after c takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop c6 was played. And even here, it's just like, well, what's the problem? This is going to fizzle. No, bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, knight takes was played. That's probably a little unfortunate. But I guess the point is if rook takes d8, rook h7 was a little bit scary. And anyway, after knight takes d8, rook c7, king b6, rook d7, already Caruana kind of lost himself a little bit and realized, wow, this game is going to continue. And you can see very easily here that the extra pawn that white has is kind of, the extra pawn that black has is kind of irrelevant. And the bishop is the better minor piece here. The rook is more active. And yes, as is being mentioned to me in chat right now, yeah, Naka got some more anti-fizzle spray, no doubt about it. And unfortunately, I think Caruana played b4 here, which really doesn't have much to do with what's going on. And Naka went king f1, stopped the rook from invading, and ultimately wound up winning this game. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I think we can all envision maybe white being the one in the driver's seat here for the reasons we outlined. And I want to emphasize just how important it is to hold the rope sometimes. It's something I have to do too. I mean, of late, I have not been doing it well because all these games are rapid games. They're done under duress. And if we are able to kind of make really practical decisions under duress, good things happen. Good things really begin to happen. All right. That is it for me. I guess what we do now is we unleash the chat, right?